Well, thank you, Admiral Christensen, for that introduction, for the invitation. I have to say I've really enjoyed meeting the students here tonight and the members of the foundation. It's the first time I've had a chance to be here, and I'm extremely impressed. So it really is an honor to be at the Naval War College, which is really America's oldest military graduate school. So it says a lot for the vision that it took to put this in place. Tonight I want to talk about the importance of innovation and culture and what it means for an enterprise, both like the military and also companies like GE, and the leadership required to navigate in an uncertain world. But before I do, I want to say something that I've said before. I've never believed that leadership is a chore, it's a choice. It's never a burden, it's always an honor. And the same is true for service. So before I say anything else, let me say this, thank you. Because of the service of the people in this room, we're a better country, and all of us owe you a great debt of gratitude. I'm very proud to say that the Navy has been the partner to GE for about 100 years. The relationship, in fact, dates all the way back to Thomas Edison in World War I. This is the Spruance Lecture, as the Admiral said, and we're in the Spruance Auditorium, named after the great Admiral who was a hero and led in the Pacific Theater during World War II. And I'm very proud that the destroyer class, named after Admiral Spruance, are the first large operational U.S. Navy ships to use gas turbine propulsion, more specifically the GE LM 2500 engine. And that same family of engines powers the Navy's entire surface fleet today. And the LM 2500 also helps power the new amphibious carrier, the USS Macon Island, the Navy's first hybrid drive warship. We also power half of the LCS fleet. We powered the Navy and Marine Corps' last four combat-proven frontline fighters, the F-4 Phantom, advanced models of the F-14 Tomcat, the F-18 Hornet and Super Hornet. And we power two of three of the helicopters in the U.S. fleet, and about half the Air Force's bombers and half of the Air Force's fighter planes. Now, I say that because you should know that the GE teams in our manufacturing plants across the country that are building these engines really know their destination. They know their purpose, and they couldn't be prouder. Speaking of those GE employees, I should really add, as I often do, that there's an ulterior motive for my journey here tonight, and that's recruitment. GE is a 130-year-old company. In fact, we got our start roughly the same time as this great institution. And today we have more than 300,000 employees. We have close to $160 billion in revenue. We're in the top 10 in the world in revenue and earnings and market capitalization. And despite the fact we're an American company, more than 60% of our revenue takes place outside the United States. We're working on important things that matter. And I've been a GE employee for more than 30 years. We really are a great place to work, and we're always looking for the best people. And more than that, we often find the talent that it takes to lead the company in this room and with your peers. We have senior military leaders throughout the company from all branches of the military, and that includes Captain Steve Maynard, who is a member of the Naval War College's class of 1990, and who served as your school's chairman of Joint Military Operations Department. Today, GE employs more than 10,000 veterans. Now, there's a lot of officers, but there's also a great number from the enlisted ranks. Last month, we joined forces with other companies, people like Lockheed and Boeing and Alcoa, who understand that the military offers really the great talent required for competitiveness in what we call Get Skills to Work coalition. The idea really boils down to supply and demand. There's a great need, and it's for the qualified, skilled workers for the high-tech jobs that define advanced manufacturing, so critical to competitiveness in the U.S. today. It's estimated that there's going to be 600,000 advanced manufacturing jobs that are open and waiting to be filled, and that an aging workforce, the need becomes even more apparent. The supply should be our veterans, too many of whom are struggling to find meaningful work and a career. So we set a goal of matching 100,000 veterans to advanced manufacturing jobs by 2015. And we can get it done if we offer transition and translation help So even if we speak different languages, the private sector recognizes the skills that veterans are bringing home. If we work with community colleges to provide extra training for vets, making sure we build a curriculum based on the right skills, and if we empower employers by sharing best practices, we're going to help employers be even more effectively, or help them more effectively recruit, onboard, support, and mentor these key veterans in the civilian workforce. It's a great initiative, and there's a real bottom line imperative, and we're really enlisting other companies to join the cause. But there's something else I want to share. As a part of our announcement last month, a GE employee named Lionel Hamilton told his story. Following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, Lionel enlisted to serve his country as soon as he finished high school. He worked as a helicopter mechanic before ultimately becoming a helicopter pilot. He flew a Black Hawk in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and today oversees an assembly plant at a GE testing facility in Peebles, Ohio. At this session, someone asked him about the ability to problem solve. And does a military background really offer that much more than any other experience? And here's what Lionel said. You're 22 years old, you're in a country like Afghanistan or Iraq, and you're asked to go door to door and conduct international relations in a country where you're at war. Compared to that, getting a GE engine off the line and out of the factory on time just doesn't seem that difficult. Now, I tell that story because it makes an important point. Being able to understand the task and then having the ability to execute unfazed, even when the environment is ambiguous, uncertain, or volatile, is critical. That's what we need to be competitive, and that's what we need to win. The subject of competitiveness is at the center of our national debate today. In many ways, it was the subject of the election last week. This country is divided, something that's expected after you live through an economic crisis. People are apprehensive and uncertain, and there are no easy pathways to the future. And that's because we've entered a new economic era. The U.S. is slowly recovering from a deep recession that was really a long time in coming. We'd built an economy with too much leverage and too little innovation. And while the economy gets better every day, we still must fix our fiscal imbalances and restore our systems of competitiveness. Sometimes we feel good because we're better than Europe, but that's a low bar. We've spoken more about Greece recently than at any time in the last 2,000 years. European systems of governance have been tested, and Europe has stabilized, but we don't expect growth there for a very long time. So the Chinese economy is critically important. It remains an engine of global growth. It's really what pulls forward most of the emerging countries, and they're in the middle of selecting new leaders, but I expect China to grow. And beyond geopolitics, we live in an era where natural resources are creating winners and losers at a hectic pace. Here, the U.S. may be fortunate. For the first time in my lifetime, North America has a chance for energy self-sufficiency. We truly are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. And this creates real options for the U.S. going forward. So growth is available, but it's in new places. There's more volatility. Governments are more active because fiscal systems are broken. China's a big player. Unemployment is high in every country in the world, and resource strategies are important. This is the new economic normal. Now, the election is finally over, thank God. I don't know about you, but I think that is great news, because it's really a time for action on the deficit, on energy policy, to improve education. I don't think government can solve our problems, but we can't remain frozen. It's time to get to work. Now, what we try to do inside GE is to prepare our people for volatility and uncertainty. This environment, this slow, steady grind, could last a long time. We're a company that doesn't believe in excuses. We know how to win in this environment. We want to be competitive, so we must be ready. Companies, and really countries, must compete and win in this environment. The world is moving forward, No one's going to give us success. And the basis of really the future and the basis for our competitiveness really requires a spirit of innovation, a culture that drives execution, and positive leadership that inspires a better future. Innovation, culture, leadership. And that's really what I want to talk to you about tonight. Now, we need growth, but only innovation drives growth. That's why we as a company invest $7 billion each year in R&D. Our success is measured by patents and engineers executing complex systems. We try to do those things that very few companies in the world can do. Build jet engines, execute subsea oil and gas technologies, and introduce life-saving MR technologies. We recently launched a new jet engine for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. This engine consumes 25% less fuel than the one it replaced. It's $1 billion investment and represents decades of research and development, but it can't be matched. And it will create thousands of new jobs. So the main source of our competitive advantage comes from science, engineering, and innovation. We are a company of ideas. Similarly, rejuvenating America's growth and entrepreneurship is going to be key to our success. And as a country, we need to focus on graduating more engineers, investing in R&D, and rewarding innovation. Now that innovation opens up the door for big advancements in advanced manufacturing. The U.S. must recapture our manufacturing excellence. GE is a $20 billion exporter. We're second in the world behind only Boeing. Our factories, we know, can compete with anybody in the world. Last year, we moved all of our appliance manufacturing jobs back from Mexico and China to the U.S. We're investing $1 billion in new products. We've changed the way we work with our unions. And with lean manufacturing and great new products and a motivated workforce, this country can compete. And we're pioneering software and analytics, or what at GE we call the industrial internet. This is about bringing the power of social media to industry and connecting the machines that run our world, making them smarter. It's all about how we take big data we've been hearing about and turning it into productivity. But to win and to innovate, we've got to capture the world. We've got to embrace globalization. We sell in 140 countries. More than 1 billion consumers will join the middle class in the emerging markets over the next decade. 1 billion. More than 95% of the world's population lives outside the United States. Now, I'm an American. My dad worked at GE for 40 years. I run an American company. But I also know that for GE to be successful in the future, we need open markets. I've got to sell my products in every corner of the world. Every employee at GE in the United States, from the factory floor to the boardroom, thinks we can beat anyone in the world. GE has 50% market share of gas turbines used to create electricity. In the next few years, we'll sell more of these units in Algeria than we will the United States. If we want to create jobs at home, we've got to win globally. And to innovate, we must take risks. Clearly, the financial crisis was caused by some people taking outsized risks with poor controls. And this is being fixed. But successful business is about taking risks. We've decided to create 4 joint ventures in Russia: in energy, healthcare, oil and gas, and locomotives. Is this risky? You bet. But so is doing nothing and waiting for Europe to grow again. More than ever in this environment, success requires bold actions. So bold ideas come from discipline, courage, and purpose, all things that are part of our culture and the militaries as well. We drive the innovations I talked about through a culture of execution. At GE, we think that culture is a competitive advantage. It's the only thing that allows a company to survive for 130 years. So what is culture? It describes a set of behaviors that guide performance in good times and bad. It's the glue that holds together diverse groups. It drives performance with integrity. It's a catalyst for action and a source of pride. Culture keeps you humble when the times are too good and confident when the days are dark. Now, one of the most important things about our culture is that we're mission-based. We believe that the products we make and sell change the world. We're in energy, healthcare, transportation. We build, we power, we move, we cure the world. We know that we can help our customers become more productive and make the world work better. Our employees come to work knowing that what they do matters. It's palpable, and for me, it's inspiring. I tell young people that if you come to work at GE, you're going to sit in the front seat of history. We're advancing new technologies and play in markets that matter. Our people like what they do because they believe in the mission. Build, power, move, cure. Money may reward, but mission motivates. And strong cultures are mission-based. Our culture constantly searches for a better way. We don't think we're the best in the world at anything. We promote a learning culture, a humble culture. We're always looking for ways to improve. We look for partnerships. We strive to be nimble and responsive. And we're very much a working person's company, a place where no job is beneath you. Early in my career, I was responsible for our appliance service business. We had a catastrophic failure of refrigerator compressors. We had to fix all of them, 3.3 million to be exact. So I learned to fix compressors. Not well, I might add. You want a humbling experience? Go into a stranger's kitchen and try to fix their refrigerator while the ice cream melts. So why did I do it? Because only through that hands-on experience could I learn a better way. Good cultures always seek the next great idea and realize it may just as likely come from outside your company. Our culture is solutions-oriented. We're looking for solutions for our customers and society. And we like tackling big challenges like energy and healthcare. 7 years ago, we launched an initiative called Eco-Imagination, our effort to show that we could help meet the world's energy and environmental needs and do it profitably. In a constrained world, it's all about improving resource efficiency and productivity. It's all about driving performance. So we work in what people immediately think of as green spaces, renewables like wind. But we're also hard at work at coal mines, from Pennsylvania to Peru, developing solutions that allow our customers to operate productively while achieving high environmental standards. We're working with our customers in China to tap into the world's largest technically recoverable shale gas reserve. And that work is paying dividends. Our clean energy portfolio continues to grow at a rate of more than twice the company average. And why is that? Because the focus isn't on what worked in the past. It's on providing new solutions for the future. And we have a similar story in healthcare. I come at this both as someone who leads a company with a large healthcare business and as a large-scale employer. I also travel the world, and I can tell you the healthcare issues are the same. We've got to drive down cost while improving quality and access. Health Imagination is our commitment to do just that, to find disruptive technologies and new business and delivery models that change the game. So our culture is solutions-oriented. The big problems that shape the 21st century, that's where we want to be. And our culture is based on teamwork. GE is a we company, not a me company. If you walk through the doors of GE, the company always comes first. We enjoy working with each other. At our factory in Durham, North Carolina, we make the world's most powerful jet engine. 40% of our employees are veterans, and they work as part of self-directed teams. It's a flat hierarchy. They determine their own schedules and deadlines. They support one another. And that speaks to what defines us as a company. The collective is what makes GE. And while our businesses, aviation and transportation and capital and appliances and energy, are all significant on their own, the sum of GE will always be more than its parts. The only way this could work is through shared intellect and shared accountability. We love to share best practices, and each of us must compete and deliver results, and we never let each other down. So GE has a spirit of innovation and a culture of execution. And we're ready for the future. We like to compete. And as I stand here tonight, we're successfully selling turbines and engines and locomotives around the world. And often we're winning against Chinese or German competitors whose government is giving them free financing or other support. But our products are better, our service is better, and we hustle harder. We don't rely on our government's help, but our position is enhanced when the U.S. also wants to compete and win. Now, the U.S. retains many advantages. We have a strong entrepreneurial community, great universities, and a sense of teamwork. And when I go to our factories, I see a great competitive spirit, and I know that Americans want to win again. As the Admiral said, I had the chance to lead the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Our recommendations were very focused. We must do a better job of training our workers. We must nurture small business. We must fix a regulatory structure that is complex and stops growth. We must invest in infrastructure. At the same time, we have to reform big systems of competitiveness, like taxes, education, and immigration. To be honest with you, the answers are obvious. But no council can provide the tone of partnership that's required to solve our problems. Coming out of our financial reset, leadership has been discounted. Our systems in business and government have been challenged, and vision and aspirations have sometimes disappeared, and in their place are fear, anger, and blame. And speaking sometimes seems to replace doing. Too many people say, let's go back to a simpler time. That ain't going to happen. The world is only going to become more complex. What we need is inspiration from positive leadership. Not head in the sand, pie in the sky leadership that ignores realities or difficulties of our challenges. But people do want to be led. They're hungry for leadership. And they're looking for something or someone to rally behind. And I think they need today what I would call positive leadership. Positive leaders drive big ideas and take swings. You know, I've found that people will work very hard in uncertain times if they have a real vision for the future. People want to follow dreams. They want to see the future, and they will work hard to make that happen, even with great uncertainty. Positive leaders have stamina and energy. They're present with their teams constantly. They touch people, they communicate, they motivate every day. At GE, we're constantly reducing layers inside the company to improve communication. And the only way to motivate a hardworking entire team is through enthusiasm, and that takes stamina. Positive leaders simplify everything. Today, there can be no wasted motion, no hobbies, no special causes. Every action must have impact. People must know what's important. And therefore, leaders have to cut through the clutter and focus on what's most worthwhile. Positive leaders value clear thinking and decisiveness. They value the work that leads to action. High performance organizations lead from the front. In other words, they value frontline employees, and they have a few simple processes that lead to empowerment. You know, sometimes you make mistakes, but people aren't really looking for perfection or style points. They want results. Positive leaders must be humble, and they must be human. They have to be authentic and transparent. Importantly, they must unify. In winning organizations, there is no 1% or 99% or 47% or whatever. That's a luxury of politics. Every idea, every person counts. In the end, business leaders owe you, military leaders, two things. First, we must improve our country's ability to innovate and compete, especially in areas like energy. This country should never have to fight a war over energy. we have abundant resources. Second, we must participate in the processes that impact the country's financial future, like deficit reduction. I'm working with other CEOs to avoid the fiscal cliff. And like most of my peers, I'm committed to be a business leader that you can be proud of. But it's all about actions. The time for speech making is over. I'll close by saying that I mentioned the Naval War College's founding. Sometimes when we talk about history, it's easy to forget or gloss over just how forward-looking it was to create an institution like this. Can you imagine how much insight and vision and courage it took to build this institution more than 120 years ago? We're in Newport because someone had not just the vision, but the sheer courage to say, we may not be the best, but we're not good enough until we have the ability to adapt to ever-changing environments. And that's as true as ever. So we need both your training and your intangibles, your loyalty, integrity, commitment to excellence, and most of all, your ability to think outside the box, adapt to any situation, and solve the most difficult problems. At the end of the day, that is the defining characteristic of a winning culture and the key to leadership. You're learning that here, and you're demonstrating that for our country, and we're all the better for it. So thank you very much, and now I'm really pleased to answer questions and let the conversation move forward. Thank you very much. So I know we have some microphones, and I'm able to take questions. Yes, sir.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Wando, United States Marine Corps. You mentioned that you value preparing people for volatility and uncertainty. What specifically does GE do to set yourself up for success in that area?
So again, I think it's some things we learned from the military, actually. So in 2008, 2009 time period, we kind of went and looked at 100 organizations around the world that we thought we could learn from. And the military actually does the best job of training people how to adapt and how to lead in volatile times. So we do more scenario planning. We do a lot of scenario planning today so that we have contingencies built into financial plans and things like that. We move people into different, really, as we're building their careers, we try to purposefully put people into those jobs in crisis time. You know, you can tell a lot about somebody when they're in a period of crisis. I mentioned this appliance service job. I had this job in 1988 through 1991. It was what prepared me to be CEO of the company. It was, every day was panic. So we try to take the young talent and put them in these jobs of crisis, because the fact is you really can't tell anything about somebody in good times. You just can't. So we try to position how we work on careers as well. So I'd say a combination of scenario planning and career planning is how we've tried to prepare people. Now, the other thing I would say is if you talk to a Brazilian CEO today and you say, what made you a good business leader? They would say the early 1990s. In the early 1990s in Brazil, inflation was basically 20% a month. People that were business leaders would actually walk, bags of cash to the bank every day. Now, I would say American CEOs of my generation, we're much better having lived through the last 4 years. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I would tell you that having seen tail risk, up close and personally, you just become a better leader. So I'd say experience, scenario planning, leadership development. We try to do those three things. Other questions? Yes.
Sir, Wes Adams, United States Air Force, thanks for being here and coming tonight. It's a great pleasure. You don't get where you are without, it takes a lot to get where you are, sir. So can you share with us your most significant failure at GE and what tips what you learned from it that could help somebody in our positions?
So again, I think these are never, this is not like judging Olympic diving where you're worried about the angle of the feet when they go into water, and how much of a splash does somebody make? You're making splashes every day, right? You're doing belly flops and cannonballs. Business is very much a game of quantity and you know, from the standpoint of learning to deal with your own mistakes. And I go back to again the experience I had leading the crisis in the late '80s. You know, I learned a lot about human nature, and I learned a lot about myself. You know, I was put in a position by the CEO of the company at that time because he didn't feel like the managers were telling him the truth. So he had seen me early on. This was my successor. And he had seen me, and I was in our plastics business, and he called one day and said, you got a new job on Monday. You know, this is Jack Welch, and I was 32 years old. And I said, okay, this is a crank call. It can't possibly be Jack Welch. But it was actually Jack Welch. He says, look, you're going to Louisville Monday morning. We have what I think is going to be a crisis, but I don't know. I don't really like your boss or anybody down there, but I kind of like you. Good luck, right? And you got a chance to see. So we had this kind of wear-related failure. And so basically, based on how long your compressor ran every day, all the compressors would fail. And at that point, they were failing in Puerto Rico and Florida. So I was 32 years old. I had to grapple with the CEO of the business and the technology leader, and nobody wanted to face into the mistakes. And so it just gave me this incredible study of human nature and things like that that you got a chance to see. And that's what gave me confidence. And you know, all along, I've had the chance to see mistakes and learn from them. I'd say the toughest day I ever had in GE was in the financial crisis when I had to cut the GE dividend. And I got to tell you, I hated myself that day. You know, and just you know, we were in a financial crisis. I could have given 1,000 excuses. We weren't alone, but it was unacceptable. And I think just the ability to reflect, to make the decision because it was right for the company. And you know, you just learn that every now and then, if you have a position of leadership, you're going to have one day where everybody in the world hates you. Right? I just guarantee you, right? If you do anything. And the ability to pick yourself up after that day and kind of reflect on what you learned, but at the same time you're reflecting, you've got to kind of go take steps into the future. You know, the ability to kind of live with that is really what in the end distinguishes, particularly in the era we live in today, the ability to try, change, adapt, experience. You know, that's what you have to do. Leadership is very much a journey into yourself. You know, every day you got to look in the mirror and say, what did I learn? How can I get better? You know, it's this, you know, kind of process of self-reflection, self-renewal, self-confidence. And every night before I go to bed, you know, I feel like a failure. And I get up the next morning and say, you know, hello, handsome, let's go. And that's the, you know, that's the secret of good leaders, to have this ability to kind of learn, reflect, rejuvenate, renew confidence. And that's, and I guarantee you today, look, no matter what job you're in today, the world's just so gosh darn volatile. There's so many things out of your control. If you can't rock with it a little bit, you're going to be pretty unhappy no matter what your career is in military or business. Other questions? Yes?
Sir, Joe Piontek, Captain, U.S. Navy. You spoke about culture. But it was mostly directed, I think, at organizational culture. And I think we all have an appreciation for what happens in America, and that GE kind of captures that American culture. But when you're going after the global market, how much emphasis and how do you go about translating the foreign cultures, and how does GE go out and go about reaching and understanding those cultures? How much of that comes and gets worked on within GE?
So it's a great question, I think, and it's one that's very much learning by doing, because there's just not many books you can read. You know, I can still pick up a book on strategy or marketing or something like that and learn something. I can't pick up a book on globalization and learn anything. The world moves too quickly, and it's just unfolding while you speak. So I think what we try to do is first understand that we're a learning culture, and by definition, if you're a learning culture, it says you're open to change. You're open to reflect and take an idea that you might learn in Latin America or Russia or places like that and incorporate that into, we don't say we're an American, quote unquote, culture. We say we're a learning culture. Then we have certain things that never change. You know, our rules are our rules. Doesn't matter where we are. We follow American law. We follow very strong set of rules. And we basically tell you, no matter where you are, those rules never change on how we do training, how we do Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, how we interface with governments and things like that. So we have a solid core of things that are just kind of sacred. And then we add on that company initiatives that we want to drive, whether they're in quality or sales or marketing, that we try to bring a company culture across those. And then, if you want to win in the Chinese healthcare market, which we have a $2 billion Chinese healthcare business, you're going to run that business differently than you run an American business. So we have a layer of what I would call local culture. We have a layer of what I call company processes that are kind of a one company process. And then we have a bedrock of rules and governance that we treat as sacred. And the mixture of those three things is what creates the company. That we have half our employees are outside the United States. Of the top 180 people in the company, 40% have a non-US passport. It grows every year. It's an interesting thing, because Americans hate globalization, right? My dad's 85, 86 years old. He hates it. Press hates it. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, both hate it in their own way. I would say, look, if I could have it my way, all of our customers would be in Chicago, right? It's more fun, but that's not where they are. My customers are in every corner of the world. If you think post 9/11, if we had to take our aviation business and rely on U.S. airlines, we'd be dead right now. It's Emirates and Etihad and Qatar Airlines and all the Chinese airlines. That's what's made our company. So this notion of how do you globalize and how do you continue to reflect and change. And we have practices now that are company best practices that we learned in Europe or China or India, other places. When I look at the healthcare business, believe me, in the next decade, we're going to bring more practices from India back to the United States than vice versa. And so you've got to have very much an open thinking. The one thing that's uniquely American is what makes American companies respected in every corner of the world, but makes sometimes our fellow citizens not like us very much. And that is we treat everybody the same. One of the things that's uniquely American is that the training, the education, the way people's career dreams and stuff like that, we basically treat everybody that enters the doors at GE, no matter where they come, we treat them the same. And that's why people like American capitalism. Believe me, they still do. And at the same time, I think sometimes I have a hard time convincing my fellow citizens that I can be a good American and still treat everybody the same. And that's a paradox we're just going to have to live with. But that's what gives us a tremendous advantage. Look, the Chinese are all over Africa today. But people like American investment in Africa today. Why is that? Because we train people. We bring quality standards. We promote them. We educate them. We develop them. We treat our employees in Africa. They have access to the same training programs that any of our employees have in any place in the United States. Believe me, that is different than other global companies do from other parts of the world. That is an asset. So, long-winded answer to say globalization is important. Our culture tries to have certain things that are sacred, but certain things that are open. And believe me, we can have our own self-doubt, but American capitalism is still considered to be best in class. And we benefit from that as an American company. Other questions? Yes.
Sir George Lewis, I'm an Army officer. My wife is an instructor for the Department of Defense's Transition Assistance Program, helping enlisted and officers transition into business. I think in our profession, while many of us love this profession, none of us want it to be our last profession, whether it's a soldier that comes in for 2 years or somebody that's served for 30. I'd ask you, what can we do as leaders in the military to better prepare folks to transition into GE and other programs?
So again, I think from an officer standpoint, the fit is really obvious, and I would say in many ways the burden's more on us than on you. I think there's great transition services for officers. Each branch has its own way to do it, and we have what's called, kind of a junior officer leadership program. So we have a program where you can come into GE, become a supply chain leader, a global leader, and that bridge works pretty well. And then the program I spoke about earlier is for the million, plus enlisted people that are going to be looking for a job. And there it's a function of translation, right? In other words, a young enlisted soldier coming home says, I'm a tank driver, right? Now it turns out that gives them 6 other skills of, reading controls and, being a mechanic and things like that, but they don't know that. So the first step is to be able to put in a military capability and translate that into a business capability. And that's one of the things that all these business companies I talked about are working on that translation, quote unquote, in terms of how you do that better. Then we've got to find ways to get some of these enlisted folks into community colleges to teach them how to weld, and that has to be, a program called Right Skills Now. So we're taking these guys and getting them the right, I would say, hands-on training if they don't have the natural translation. And then the third step is just get employers on the ball to know where the people are going to come back to and things like that. So I think the military's trying. Business wants to hire veterans. It's easier on the officer side than it is on the enlisted soldier side. And look, we want to bring in. We're going to go from 10,000 to 15,000 veterans. So we're going to do basically 1,000 a year, and that'll be probably 100 management and 900 kind of hourly and service workers. And we like the teamwork. We like the brains. We like the can-do attitude, and we like. We're in some pretty interesting spots, and compared to where some of you guys have been, it ain't so tough, And we've tried to reach out to people like your wife to be able to do a better job of working with all these transition groups to try to put these folks back to work. Yes?
Evening, sir. Bob Shea. Wall Street Journal reports that you're going to meet with the president later this week.
Tomorrow.
What will your advice be to him on the fiscal cliff and specifically on sequestration?
So, I think we need to do something about the fiscal cliff. In other words, the capital markets are already weighing in. I think the economic impact of just letting all the Bush era taxes expire, as well as anything else, people say is going to be a couple points of GDP. And it's just a level of uncertainty at a time when we don't need it. So, in other words, look, I think business hasn't been perfect in other words, business deserves a certain set of blame, right? And our job should be to keep our mouth shut and run good companies and do better. I get that. This can only be solved by Congress working together. In other words, you can sit around and you can blame this person or that person or somebody else or Charlie here or the election or this guy or Fox News or whatever, right? But the fact is that unless we get people in the House and the Senate to work with the president, this is not going to get solved. And it's got to get solved. And it can only get solved by compromise, and it's got to get solved now. So one thing is, guys, you can criticize 1,000 other people, blah, 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 blah. It's now time for you to do your job, to do your work. And I expect that they will. Now, in general, look, I think every American should read the Deficit Commission report by Simpson, called Simpson-Bowles today. And this is going to be plus or minus 10%. At some point, it's going to be plus or minus 10% of Simpson-Bowles, right? So you're going to have to do $2 or $3 trillion of spending reduction. You're going to have to do $1 or $1.5 trillion of revenue raisers. We believe in corporate tax reform. We think that take away loopholes, lower the rate, make it simpler, make a territorial system. All of this is in Simpson-Bowles. So on one hand, there's only one group of people that can do it. And on the other hand, I'd say you've got a blueprint more or less of what to do. And I think all we can do is say, look, we all are, none of us expect to go through this pain-free. We don't. We just like to let it happen now. Sooner is better than later. And in the end, there's only one group that can do this, and they're in Washington, D.C. And we're finally down to this is the time to do it. Now, sequestration is ugly, right? I was with my aviation team today. There is nothing pretty about sequestration, right? It's sudden, it's overt, it's extreme, and it's kind of the worst way to do one of these things. But we need all to work together on deficit reduction. $4 trillion over 10 years is about what the answer is. We've got a reasonable roadmap to get it done. Am I going to like it necessarily, all of it? No, nor will any company. But I think we're now down to, what we have to do. What I've learned about leadership over time is almost everybody does what they have to do at some point. We're now down where every other option has been split away. The election is over. It's now time for compromise. And I expect it. Really, I expect it to happen. I have massive respect for people in public service. I really do. I think they have tough jobs. I have massive admiration for the people that do this, and I have massive respect for the people that are willing to do it. So I'm not a business guy that says we're better. I think we need good business. Does better when the public sector is well led. We do much better, and I think we'll get that at some point. Other questions? Yeah, right here. Yeah.
My name is Nick van Dongen. I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I recently heard that American industry and businesses and manufacturing is looking for about 5 or 6 million jobs that are unfilled throughout the country. And that the reason for that is that people that apply aren't skilled for those particular jobs. Now, in the past, a lot of industry manufacturing parts of companies in the country used to have training and apprentice programs where they would bring those people up. And that sort of has disappeared a lot, and they're now relying upon the government or colleges to provide those skills. And it isn't happening. Could you enlighten us a bit as to your part of that manufacturing, why that is and why industry isn't investing in that to provide that skills?
So a great question. I'd give you just, there's probably somewhere between 2 and 3 million open jobs today, despite the fact we have high unemployment. So that's more the number. It's a big number. It's not quite the 4 to 5, but I think that's real. And we suffer because a lot of people are undertrained for some of the core manufacturing jobs. Some of that speaks to, I just think, the bad state of affairs our secondary schools are. While we still have a great university system, our secondary education, and I remember meeting with Buster Hagenbach when he was superintendent of West Point, or Stan McChrystal, or Mike Mullen, or people like that, talk about how hard it is to get people to go from a high school campus into the military. Just because, so the secondary schools have really gone away, and your point, there are a number of what I would call classic manufacturing companies like GE that still have apprenticeship programs, but a lot of the other kind of manufacturing in the country has been hollowed out. So as our manufacturing has gone from maybe 25% of our workers down to 9%, right? A lot of these training programs from smaller companies have gone away. So on our behalf, we still do apprenticeship programs. We still train people. That's still really important. I think what we need to do is tap into what's called in the U.S. community colleges. And community colleges need to really be a way that small business and medium-sized business can do training on welding and skills like that. And without that, I just think, so what we're trying to do as big businesses is work with community colleges in our town, so that'll help the small businesses that are in our supply chain and help them do better as well. But we've got a big generational gap. A lot of our workers in our factories are 60 years old, 55 years old. If you work in the oil services field, there's going to be like 2 to 3 million oil services workers that retire in the next 5 years. So all that training is going to be significant in terms of what you're going to do. So if you want jobs, really, this is what I learned being on the President's Council. Training, I'd put at the top of the list. I learned from, there's a great entrepreneur, a business guy named Wilbur Ross, and I've done some deals. He's just great, billionaire and funny and fun. And I was doing a deal with him once, and he said, "Hey, Jeff," he says, "I'm older than you. Let me give you a tip. Always do the easy things first." He says, you're working on too many hard things. Do the easy things first. I think that was a good leadership tip. So if you're looking for jobs, fill the open jobs first, right? Have a dedicated focus on open jobs, get them filled. That's number one. Number two, our new business creation, small business creation, is 30% below in this recovery any other recovery we've ever had. So we are not getting this new generation of small businesses to get created. That is a big problem in the U.S. today. Number three, our regulations are really perverted, And look, I'm a business guy, so no business guy likes regulators, right? So it's just I put that out there with full transparency. But we need high standards, right? As America, we need high standards. But the number of agencies that touch any given rule is too many. And there's no reason why getting a transmission line approved across state lines should take 12 years. It just seems a little long, So you got to do something about regulations. Fourth, we got to build infrastructure. I mean, the one lesson that China has for the rest of the world is that infrastructure both creates jobs, it also creates productivity. So we've got to. So I would do training, small business, regulation, infrastructure. If we did those four things, I'm not telling you that unemployment's going to be 6% or 7%. I'm not that smart, and a lot of it depends on other stuff. We can do a lot better than where we are. Simple, focused activity. And training's key. And then, you're from Europe, so you see the system in Europe, which, still delivers good, well-trained people. Yeah.
Captain Mohammed from Jordan. Sir, as a result of the financial crisis, many U.S. companies depended upon U.S. government bailout packages. What is unique about General Electric that made it less dependent on government help survive through the crisis?
So we had a big industrial, we were big in financial services, but GE was really GE Capital's TARP program. So basically the industrial company put $40 billion into financial services during the crisis. And now we want it back. So that's the thing. But look, if you were in financial services the day Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, I'm speaking at the Naval War College. It's a little bit like in your destroyer takes a torpedo and you're kind of bailing water and, a few people in lifeboats and stuff like that. It wasn't much fun. And, I think financial services is a good industry. The country needs financial services. We've got to get it back to being lending, growth, capital to companies that are growing, and less out of the speculative world. That was never really what we were into. But if you have a $60 trillion global economy, more or less, let's say plus or minus $5 trillion, and if you have a $65 trillion credit default swap market, you're a little bit unbalanced. And that was kind of where the world was in 2008 and what needed to be unwound. Yes?
Sir, Warren Cook, Marine Corps. I got one question, 3 parts.
Is this a Marine thing? Is this a Marine thing or just a, yeah?
No, it's what's your favorite drink? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite movie?
Oh, gosh. To be honest with you, I don't drink much anymore. When I was young and I used to travel, I'd go to a hotel and say, where's the nightclub? And now I say, where's the health club? It's just a difference in time. I just read, I'm an avid reader, so I read probably close to 100 books a year, and I read all kinds of vertical magazines, Aviation Week, stuff like that. So I travel a lot, travel around the world, so I see a lot. And I just read this biography of Ulysses Grant called The Man Who Saved the Union. And I think for military folks, you would really enjoy it. He was an awesome general. When you read the history, and I'd say an underappreciated president. You read the book and you say, look, this guy was an awesome general, probably a pretty good president, but led in very difficult times. If you think about, he was president from 1868 to 1876, and he led through some tumultuous times, 5 years of recession, all the post-Civil War. So that was an awesome book. I do about a third biographies, maybe a third history, a third business. And actually the books about generals are actually some of the most interesting books you can read. And then I love Westerns. There's an old 1970s Western called The Wild Bunch. It's a Sam Peckinpah movie. There's about 2,000 people die in this movie, so, it's one that I could never get my wife to go see. But if you like Westerns, this is about as good as it gets. So I'd say that's really my favorite movie. And, I've seen Caddyshack maybe 30 times, so maybe those two. Yes?
Dan Baker, middle school science teacher on a local school on this island. And those who are hormonally challenged, I deal with those every day. And what type of message would you like me to bring back to my students? And more importantly, what type of message would you like the parents and the grandparents in this room to bring back to the youth of America as they go through the educational system and face the future of America?
It's a great question. I would say STEM is in. Science, technology, engineering, math, your field. This is critical. And it's critical that young people today pick that as their future. That they're comfortable with science, they're comfortable with math, they're willing to be engineers. We need guys like you that teach them the love for it early on. And that, as much as anything else, in other words, anytime you're on a presidential council like the Jobs Council, you owe the president some things that can help him short term. But if we had to do one thing as a country that would protect us for the long term, it's to improve our education. And where we are today in math and science is unforgivable and will lead us down a bad path. Paul Otellini, who was on with me on the Jobs Council, is CEO of Intel. And he thought, and this was probably one of our best initiatives, was to graduate 10,000 more engineers in the United States every year. We graduate about 135,000 engineers every year as a country. China and India do 1 million. So that's a sense of kind of where we are. And basically, we could probably double that number and fully employ, that number of engineers. And the value of that number of engineers is that they create other jobs. And one of Paul's dreams that I have to say I'm quite in sync with him is, could the private sector ever, raise enough money and create enough jobs to basically say to somebody that's a junior in high school, if you go to get a 4-year engineering degree and go to work as an engineer, your education will be paid for through work, through scholarships, that basically you would say to everybody who is your student today, if you're willing to kind of go long in math and science, your education is going to be paid for. That to me is kind of like the mission to the moon, that's what we need. And that's what that's what we have to have. That's probably my biggest concern about the country and one of the biggest things we have to do. So, yes?
Sir, Lieutenant Commander Lars Erlander, U.S. Navy. You mentioned earlier that you're currently moving a large number of manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Given the high cost of labor here, how are you managing to do this?
So, globalization, so I'm a 30-year GE guy, and let's say the first 20 years of my career, globalization was really all about, or a lot of globalization was about labor arbitrage. It was kind of Mexico and places like that, and I would say in the 80s, it started to get a little bit better in the 90s. In the 80s, we had these terrible relationships with the unions that just got out of control. I would say management was 50% to blame. Unions clearly 50% to blame. And we just had a horrible environment in most of the 80s and 90s to make things. I can remember being in plant locations, watching 1,000 guys go out on wildcat strikes and blah, blah, blah. So we really had I'd say a 20 or 30-year bad history between management and labor, that management deserves 50% of the blame. And that kind of culminated with, I would say, big automotive companies going bankrupt during the financial crisis. It was just these things always end in a bad way. Today, basically with new manufacturing science, things like additive manufacturing, 3D printing, lean manufacturing and stuff like that, we can make a refrigerator with 2 hours of labor. When we make a jet engine, materials are the biggest part of the cost structure. Labor is really a lower portion of the cost structure. Our unions are much more flexible, and they're much more open to change than they've ever been before. And we find basically we can make anything in the GE system anywhere we want to today and be more or less competitive. So let's say let's say your worker in the U.S. makes 15 or 20 bucks an hour. They can compete with somebody in China making $2, just with location, manufacturing methods, manufacturing science, things like that. And that's the way you want to run your country. I'm fortunate that I have a really good company with a lot of technology, but you basically want to be able to put stuff where you want to put it, so you can access markets or things like that. So we still have a lot of factories in China and other places, but it's mainly to access the local market and less to just for chasing. If you're chasing low-cost labor, you're never in that chase. Now, manufacturing, the interesting thing about the U.S. is that people went from making, 30 bucks an hour in a manufacturing plant to making $8 an hour in a fast food restaurant. There was nothing in between. And so this notion that we as a country could go from making things to a service economy, we were the only one that read that book. Every other country, in China, there's a book that said, don't read the Americans' book, because we basically hollowed out a lot of, the jobs that put me through school. My dad was manufacturing what's called an MSO, so he was in sourcing and manufacturing and jet engines, and those kind of jobs were the jobs that created a future for me. So we all need to be working, we can't do it in a Pollyanna-ish way, but we all need to be working on those. And I think letting our manufacturing slide basically hurt not just competitiveness, but it took out a big chunk of jobs that basically went, people didn't go from making 30 bucks an hour to making 27. They went from making 30 bucks an hour to making 8. And that's why you see, average wage go down for 30 years and things like that. So we got to capture more value added back again in the country. Yes.
Lieutenant Misara Squadron from Romanian Navy. It is known that money is a coward. So what makes General Electric invest in markets like Russia? Can you briefly describe the risk assessment in your company, emphasizing the difference from other companies that do not invest in such countries?
So basically, a rule of business is that if you want to make money, hang around people that have money, right? Russia is long in everything in the world that's worth a lot. Natural gas, titanium. I mean, this is a country that has immense capability and wealth. It's what we call resource rich. And Saudi Arabia, resource rich. Russia, resource rich. Africa, Mozambique, Angola, Brazil, Peru. I could go down the list. These are countries that, because of where oil is priced or iron ore is priced, have an immense need, a huge transference of wealth, and all of them want to go from being resource-rich countries to being more industrialized. So we think these are great GE customers over time. Now Russia's, it's an away game, and there is, the laws, I would say, the best thing you can say about the laws is that they're ever changing, right? So the way I look at, the way most business works is risk reward. So basically I go to my board and say, look, we should be willing to risk, pick a number, $200 million to make investments there, but we could lose it all. I want the board to know we could lose it all. So we shouldn't be $1 billion. For a company our size, it should be a certain amount. So we pick $200 million. But if we're successful, we're going to earn $10 billion. So the board looks at that and says, hey, $200 million, $10 billion, you could lose it all, we get it. That's Russia. Big reward, some risk. So you just try to manage that in a certain way. Now, I go to India. The government of India wants us to build a nuclear power plant with no liability protection, right? So if you do everything right, you might make 50 million. And if you make one mistake, you lose 100 billion or something like that, You say, no thanks. I put that in my risk model. I say no to that one. And every decision is kind of this balance. When you go to countries like that, you go to this balance between risk reward. And you've got to, as a company, you got to be willing to look into that. Look, if the U.S. economy was growing 4 or 5% every year, and Europe was growing 2 or 3% every year, and Japan was growing 2 or 3%, that would be more fun and easier. That's not the world we live in today. The world we live in today is U.S. growing 1 to 2, Europe 0, and Japan negative. So if you're not willing to hustle for business and go, and you don't want to take foolish risk, you just want to balance risk reward. And I view Russia as being a good risk reward trade-off right now for the company. It's not risk-free, but as long as we have our eyes open and have the rewards, that's what we have to do. Now, when I say all that, look, I think people that can help us do that are military folks. In other words, I look at people that have been trained the way you guys have been trained, and I say, okay, the next mission is Russia. You guys say, hey, let's go, Somebody that's been sitting on their butt in a factory in the U.S. where everything's given to them every day, it's less fun, right? It looks harder. And that's my world. My world is one where we've got to be opening up those new doors all the time. Angola, we're building a factory right now. Angola. Algeria, building a factory right now. Algeria. Russia, Kazakhstan, our largest locomotive deal in 2012 came from Kazakhstan. Not from Omaha, not from Dallas, Kazakhstan. So I think that's fun. I think it's exciting. That's the world. Maybe a couple more. Yes, sir.
Sir, Captain Rob Sanders, U.S. Navy and Defense Institute of International Legal Studies. It's interesting that you jumped on a bunch of global challenges. My global challenge is to teach rule of law in the DRC or in the waters between China and Vietnam and India. What's your global challenge legally?
Oh, look, I think it's not as hard as yours, I don't think, but I think it's how can you run a company that has compliance and in 140 countries around the world, and at the same time be able to move fast enough to seize the opportunities we have. And it may be my single biggest challenge inside the company is we live at a moment in time when incompetence looks like fraud, right? So if you're a company, nobody is allowed to make quote unquote a mistake anymore. We still make mistakes. 300,000 people, I guarantee you the time I've been here tonight, there's been a handful that have done things I didn't want them to do, right? Now, in the media, or among our population coming through the financial crisis, coming after Enron in the last decade, and you can't blame anybody, every mistake looks like fraud. So we live in a dangerous world. We live in a dangerous world. Your job is quite trying to keep us out of danger. I try to think about the same way. At the same time, I got to do this deal in Russia, I got to do this deal in Algeria, and how do you balance the need for controls, which we need, and some of them need to be highly centralized, with the ability to act and move quickly to recognize global opportunities. That's my biggest legal and compliance challenge, and it's one that there's no easy answer for. I spend a lot of time with my general counsel, mainly to figure out how big our boundaries can be and how do we keep people safe at the same time, be able to move fast enough. Really, really tough. Maybe a couple more. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Beth Conlin, Army wife. We were talking a little bit about culture earlier, so I'm curious how the experienced commercial leadership program you have, as well as the junior officer program, how the implementation of those has impacted the culture within the company.
So the first thing I'd say on behalf of my wife, we moved 9 times, so if it's any consolation, we all have those challenges. So I think what we try to do is have a bunch of training programs that allow people to onboard inside GE. So the early commercial leadership program and the junior officer leadership program, what we try to do is bring talent people in, and then what we try to do is give them, let's say, 4 6-month assignments. So it allows them to come in the company, they get a little bit of a sense for the breadth in terms of what they might be good at, and then we get them plugged into leadership assignments as quickly as we can. And we like to give people lots of responsibility earlier in their career, because the fact is that most of our successful people get picked early. So we try to give people, quickly after they join us in programs like that, jobs where we can kind of say, okay, this person really can get on a track and go quickly. So they not only allow people to find ways inside the company, but we also try to create these moments to see them as well. And again, I think for us, leadership is the game. We spend $1 billion a year on training. So every program allows us to add to this leadership culture that we have inside the company. And one of the things I think any institution like the military is, and GE fights the same thing, is size. So we're big and it's easy to become a bureaucracy. And the one thing I learned from my predecessor is the importance of access. So we have an informality about the company that is, kind of open door, and leaders are expected to have access. Leaders are expected to be in front of their people a lot. They're expected to give people exposure opportunities early on. I do a weekly blog. I teach at our Leadership Institute a couple times a month. We're always trying to find ways to break through the barriers so we can find that people in training programs and things like that. Access is really so important, and in a big company in particular. But both good programs. Yeah.
Sir, Lieutenant Commander Pigney, just a question about your view on patents overall. In a world where you're seeing high-profile cases like Apple suing over the corners of a cell phone, have patents gone from prohibiting innovation to protecting innovation to now prohibiting it?
It's a great question. Your question on that one really is all to do with kind of where you stand in the value chain. To some people, patents are horrible because they keep people. Personally, I like patents and a lot of them, And I used to tell, when I became CEO, one of my top agenda was to make the company a good technology company again, was my number one, to make it a great place where engineers wanted to come to work. And I just think the only competitive advantage over time is technology. And I remember my chief technology officer at the time, I said, look, I want to double the patents inside GE. And he said, Jeff, that's not the right metric. It's quality, not quantity on patents. I said, yeah, just double them, okay? I understand what you're saying, but let's first get a bunch more patents than we have now. Then I'll worry about quality on my own good time, okay? So we think that intellectual property is really critical, but I know the other side of the debate. Now, we own 49% of NBC, but for a lot of my tenure as CEO, I was responsible for a big media outlet, and I always would say that, if somebody walked in your home, right, while you were sitting in there and stole your TV, right, you'd call the police, right? But if somebody steals the office, which I've invested time in, you think it's cool. Not you personally, but people say, hey, that's great, that's freedom, but if you stole my TV, that's stealing. And I think we've lost kind of a sense of outrage about it. And my own fear is that, and what the business worries about, that military worries about, is cybersecurity. And if we think that these little misdemeanors are just pat them on the head and aren't they cute when they come in and steal some companies, then we can be outraged when they shut down a utility. That's not how it works. So I just think we would all be well served if we were really intensely thinking that both small crime and big crime and cybersecurity is a big deal. So that's my only caveat. Yeah.
Sir, Lieutenant Commander Dill, U.S. Navy. Going back to energy, windmills, solar makes everybody feel good. Everybody gets really scared about strip mining with coal. Are we missing the boat with nuclear? With wind and solar, it's really such a sliver of the percentage of power we need in this country. Are we missing a boat with innovation and everything going forward with nuclear in the future?
So it's a great question, I think. The country needs let's just stick on power generation, right? The country needs a baseload technology. In other words, you need a low-cost baseload source of energy, and every country needs that. The biggest game changer in the U.S. over the last 30 years is the availability of gas. So in other words, you can talk about coal, and I wouldn't get, we believe in breadth, so we do basically everything you just mentioned, we do. So the advantage of being a big company is you don't have to be that smart. You can just, we've got a chip on every block. We're going to win one way or the other. That's, so that's kind of what we're allowed to do. But I would say the outlook just for coal is just not that great because the permitting cycle time, it takes a long time to build a plant. Sequestration is really hard, vis-a-vis putting carbon in the ground. And gas is plentiful. Gas is plentiful. And this country has a lot of it. And I think most of the environmental stuff can be solved. And so I think gas will become the next generation baseload power generation. Now, nuclear, really, someday, nuclear will rule. Okay, so how old are you? Just in other words, I don't know if it's a decade from now or 30 years from now. But it gives you freedom. It gives you a low carbon footprint. It gives you cost. So I think there is an inevitability about nuclear, but gas basically pushes it out a decade or more in the U.S. context. I think the challenge with nuclear is almost all it was really the huge industry in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the whole generation of people that went from nuclear subs into the power generation industry, they're all retiring now. And we need a next generation. And so it would be good for the country to build a couple nuclear power plants just to keep our muscle memory in place while time goes on. But Fukushima was a huge tragedy in Japan. But I don't think that's really what hurt the nuclear industry. $2 gas, $2 natural gas, $3 natural gas, that just is going to, and look, there'll still be wind, there'll still be solar, but nuclear will have a role, but it may be pushed out some period of time. Maybe one more question. Yes, sir.
anticipated potential technology losses when you go into a market like China, where you know that there is a system of place supported by the Chinese government to acquire some of these technologies?
So again, there's not one decision that we make as a company that in China that I don't personally make. So I'd say the first thing is there are some things I delegate inside the company. How we invest in China isn't one of them. So I review all of them personally. Number one. Number two is we don't do, not just in China, anywhere, we don't do tech transfer. You know, in other words, what we do is if we're going to run the business there, if we're going to do a joint venture, we'll bring technology, but we don't do just licensing or things like that just to find a way to get presence. It's just we're big enough that we don't have to do that. You know, all that being said, look, if I've done 10 deals in China, you know, 2 or 3 of them haven't worked out the way I thought they would. And so, you know, it's really a learning by doing process in terms of what works, what doesn't work, how to manage risk, things like that. You know, and the last thing I'd say is really in the end for China to be as successful as they want to be as a country, they've got to learn to protect intellectual property, their own intellectual property. So I think that progression has to be made. All that being said, and it's a great question, I think a fair question, a great question, you got to engage with China. If you're a business, if you're military, if you're a politician, no matter who you are, this is the single most important factor of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so learning how to work there, learning how to work together is something we all have to do because it is the second biggest economy, going to be arguably the biggest economy by the end of the decade. And the notion that the US and China somehow are isolated from one another, that's a bad world. So what you raise is one, I think maybe the most important issue. You know, other people would say currency. I would say IP vis-a-vis China. It's one that we got to work on and solve. Listen, these were great questions. They were fun questions. I really have enjoyed it. Thanks. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Immelt, it's been a tremendous honor to have someone of your success and leadership of our country here tonight for such an extended period of time. I'm so proud of this college and this facility and this student body and this faculty. And so it's a real honor to give you your 101st book of the year, written by is Tom Mencken here tonight by any chance? I know he's in town. He travels a lot. This book is called Competitive Strategies for the 21st Century. It's about how the U.S. military, written here in no small part by a lot of the faculty here, but how we overcame our challenges during the Cold War. And it's on the reading list of the chairman and the head of our Navy. I know Tom's had to go down there and have dinner parties and talk about this book. So hopefully you'll find it interesting. Thank you for coming to Newport.
Thanks, Admiral.
Thank you for your leadership. To all of you here tonight that made tonight possible, the Naval War College Foundation, thank you very much. All the best to General Lucker.
Great. Thank you very much, Admiral. It's really great to be with you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Okay, great.